Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast. I'm Paul Ellis, your host for these programs about developments in this fast-growing industry. My guest in today's podcast program is the managing partner of the Zero Emissions Fund, and for 2 decades has been a mentor and board advisor to green technology startups. Claudia Marcusson serves on investment boards of impact VCs and is a limited partner herself. Marcusson has worked for more than 20 years in financial services across the globe and lectures at the National University of Singapore on green technology for senior executives and C-level suites. In today's conversation, we're focusing on her role with the Zero Emissions Fund and Accelerator. Hello, Claudia, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, it's great to be with you today. And let's begin by having you tell our followers the story behind the Zero Emissions Fund, Claudia, and especially what makes it different from other impact funds.
Sure. Yeah, so actually my whole journey started already when I was a teenager. So in terms of investing, I started, I think, when I was 15 or 16, first to invest, obviously, via my father, and he had some ideas. And then the big bubble came in 2000, and you lost, obviously, money then. But I never kind of stopped to follow the markets. So investment was always some kind of topics through all the years, actually, and it's now over 30 years ago. And in my early 20s, I started to be more drawn towards startups. So not as a main job, but predominantly actually to mentor them, to advise them, to be in panels, as a panelist, basically in juries, to help them actually to scale up. And the whole sustainability topic started also pretty early. I think when I was in 2003, I started to work in the US in Chicago. And was one of the things which was striking me, the amount of plastic, actually. I don't know if it's still the case or not, but in 2003, every time at lunch, there was a lot of plastic material which was thrown away, where I thought, like, there must be a better way. So I started to bring my own little basket or my own little containers to have at least my lunch with me, and also to get the lunch then, right? So these kind of topics of investing and sustainability and startups, that kind of combination, probably it came now all together. And end of last year, I was asked to help out, and also with the Zero Emissions Fund, with the other partners, to look into it and to see, okay, how can I bring that all together? Actually, my experience in 22 years of financial institutions, having worked myself in investment management, all kind of different roles, and then together with startups. So now what makes Zero Emissions Fund very different from other investment funds, and also the funds I worked for, is that it's very early stage. And it has a clear focus on scalable decarbonization and sustainability startups in Southeast Asia, in the APEC region. So that's a bit the focus. So now APEC, you might wonder, okay, why is it different from other kind of areas? Now, greenhouse gas emissions are actually growing very fast there, as fast as the own economies are growing. And in Southeast Asia, you have a lot of natural capital, which is investable. And the good news is actually with probably up to a good 90%, you can make it worthwhile to invest there. So it's very scalable. There is a lot grounds to win, so it's not that saturated yet. And I think especially these startups, they need a lot of help to grow. So that's how we started with Zero Emissions Fund, really as early stage and more on the focus of decarbonization.
You know, it's fascinating how you got started on your own personal path related to sustainability. I had a similar experience early in the 2000 aughts as well. Mine was more of a frustration about what was happening in the investment industry in general, in terms of scandals and things like that. But I really converted what I was doing as a financial advisor at that point in time to a more sustainable approach to working with clients. Now, so you were inspired to make changes in your personal behavior that you saw the opportunities for, ultimately to focus on investment and sustainability over the long term, and especially in the APAC countries. I think that's fascinating. So what role does the Zero Emissions Accelerator play in this entire process for you?
Yes, so the Zero Emissions Accelerator is actually a free of charge accelerator. So it's based on the Startup Buddy platform. It's the startupbuddy.co, but it helps actually startups to, which are especially on the decarbonization side, regardless if we want to invest in them in future or not. It helps them with a free online accelerator program. So they get access to a network of founders, co-founders, mentors, investors. They can learn how to build their business all online and 24/7 available. They get automated toolkits. There is an academy there, and it provides benefits to business partners like, for instance, Stripe, AWS, Google, all kind of other providers which we have partnered with. And that one is usually a program which would cost them a couple of $100 annually, but we want to provide that actually to these companies on the decarbonization and sustainability side free of charge. So there are no strings attached.
So that is startupbuddy.co is the
startupbuddy.co, yes.
The startupbuddy.co. Well, I will include that link in the attachments for this program in the Bright Talk channel. But if there's any other links that you think we should include for the same purpose to give our listeners the opportunity to do their own research, I'd really appreciate it if you can send those to me. So now, during your 20 plus years in financial services, Claudia, how is this sector of the global economy changing in terms of sustainability awareness? How is that? Obviously, you've done an awful lot of work in the APAC countries, but in your experience in general, we're working with startups as well as APAC firms otherwise. How is this developing?
Yes, it's interesting, I have to say, because you see this kind of, it started like US, Europe, and slowly goes into Asia, right, with a whole awareness around sustainability and also the knowledge about it, what it is, what it's not, what you can do with it, and so on. So when I started back in the 2000s, basically, there were only a few niche investment funds, actually, which focused on, at that time, it was only the exclusion list, they called it. So in what not to invest. But then over the years, more customers, actually predominantly the customers, they started to trigger it. And it, of course, is a much higher urge still in Europe than you see in Asia. But slowly it goes there. So now you see, for instance, certain family offices also in Asia starting to have that, more, let's say, from only exclusion list going towards ESG investing, going towards SRI, so socially responsible investing, to impact investing, where actually the focus is less on the returns and more on the impact you're creating, right? So also with family office having more philanthropic arm in Asia, that's now coming. So, but it's a long way still to go. I think we still need a good $2 trillion dollars in infrastructure investments to really go to net zero. And yes, it's coming. There was one thing which actually was very interesting when I was living in Singapore, where a study actually was made amongst Asian investors. It's just like a few years back, and it figured out that investors don't really know what sustainability means. And it's like a hot topic. Yes, we should do that. It's a good, feel-good thing, but not necessarily something where they would say, what does it actually mean? What does it mean for my investments? Where do I have to divest, for instance, right? So that we are not going into any coal or mining projects, or how socially responsible actually are we with our portfolio. So that was quite interesting, and it's coming more and more. Obviously, there's still a lot of education to be done, which is also one of the fun things which I do at the site, that I also have the pleasure to lecture actually on these kind of topics to educate people more.
That's thank you for that update regarding what's been happening in the APAC countries. And of course, as you know, now in Europe and the UK and the US, we now have these large and growing regulatory infrastructures that are starting to look very much more closely at the way both public and private companies focus on sustainability, how they promote it, if they do, and what kinds of metrics and data are they actually using to track what they say they're doing related to sustainability. It's getting to the point where this kind of corporate reporting is no longer going to be voluntary. It's going to be required. So I think that that will come eventually to the APAC economies, I'm assuming, as well. Do you have any thoughts on when that might happen?
Yes, a few of them already have that. So actually within Southeast Asia, so there are a few countries who already have now a net zero target, which is already quite a big thing. So Singapore, for instance, had an SG green plan until last year in October, and then they really committed to a net zero target, so which is a big thing. Up from this year, they started to have a chief sustainability officer, which is also pretty unique for a country. So they really want to achieve the target actually still a little bit earlier than 2050. You see other countries actually more rolling towards that direction. So for instance, the stock listed companies, they are obliged to report. But then everybody else around that obviously is a little bit more of a nice to have, and there are certain guidelines around. So that will slowly probably increase, and also the carbon taxes will come. So there is a trend though, and Singapore is certainly a front runner there, but it's coming over the next years.
Yes, and as you also know, the London Stock Exchange recently initiated the first carbon trading exchange and platform within their work, and that is going to continue to grow in other places, other countries, and other exchange groups as well. There's a lot of questions about whether or not carbon trading is going to be an effective use for sustainability focus, and that's going to unfold over the next few years as well, I think probably globally. Can you share a few of your experiences over the last 20 years or so from the financial service sector based on your work in Asia, Europe, and the US with our Sustainable Finance Podcast followers related to these kinds of sustainability issues?
Sure. Yes, so in financial services, I mean, there are two main drivers, right? So it's the green investment, I would say, or green financing, and often also some form of digitalization. Now, interesting enough, the green investment is still probably a little bit behind. There are a few banks out there who do want to be the most sustainable bank. One of them was my previous employer. So they do want to do a lot actually on that side, but it also takes some time to educate suppliers, to the vendors, everybody in the whole basically chain, right? So it's not only the customers, but it's also their suppliers. So now what they're doing is digitalization and also working with fintech, so working with technology companies in that space. So that one I do see a lot now coming also in Asia. So now Europe, for instance, interesting enough, the banking world I find still a little bit, different, or maybe it's when I left a longer time ago, it feels still very much like, it's an own world, whereas in Asia, it moves very fast, and it moves really with a kind of fintechs, and it starts to also look into how can we partner with them, how can we make use of the ecosystem which is there. So now, for instance, during the last couple of years with COVID, there was a big push, obviously. So if you wanted or not, you had to go via digital channels, right, to service all the customers online. And that one was growing quite tremendously. So this is really where I see a big difference, that maybe the green financing, not yet there, but the digitalization is very heavily spread across Asia. And the other thing, for instance, I noticed was maybe in 2015, when I started to look into blockchain. I think I was the first one at that time. I worked at ING, was the first one looking into that at all. Now, obviously, you see more and more people starting to get educated, how you can make use of it. Also in terms of what kind of sustainable blockchains are there, right? What does it mean for us as a company? How can we shift things more digitally, automated, and so on? And so now there's also, at that time, there was hardly any education. So now there's much more education out there, which is great. And which is also great that I can pass on that knowledge with my, kind of lectures, which I'm also doing in emerging technologies, right?
Well, yes, and obviously that's such an important part of this acceleration and the use of digital platforms is educating people about blockchain and all of these new artificial intelligence platforms and all of these things that are being deployed now within corporations and in public and private markets by companies. So people need the education, and it's great that folks like you are prepared to offer it. Now, what about talk on this particular topic? Say a little bit about the supply chains, the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions that companies are again going to be regulated on. It's already starting to come through in the U.S. and in Europe, and it's probably going to spread to Asia as well before too long. How is that unfolding from your perspective on a global level?
Yeah, it starts with knowing it, right? So being aware, knowing it, and then starting to measure it. And then the next phase would be actually going from measuring into what kind of insights can I derive, and how can I actually potentially even commercialize it, or can draw any kind of conclusion out for it to drive my company into more growth, maybe making it better, cheaper, more efficient, more cost, basically efficient. And that's something where I see at the moment there are a lot of, for instance, carbon accounting platforms out there. So I was also mentoring a lot of them actually in the past. But it's not easy to really have that standardization there, because scope 1, 2, and 3, especially 3, is really hard to capture. So, and that's also in Asia, for instance, if you're internationally company, and even it starts with simple things. I mean, it could be, for instance, I had recently a conversation with someone in that space about specific type of cows. What is a carbon footprint of a specific cow? So now you might think that's something very specific, but it really matters, right? How do you get to all of these information, right? And then it starts to still be very much, as much as technology companies say, yes, it's all automated, but there's still a lot of consulting there, a lot of kind of adjustments, and I would say manual parts where you have to figure out what's going on. How can you all pull the data together and make it also scalable? So not only for the startups offering that service for measurement and monitoring, but also for the companies themselves, right? Because it shouldn't be a once-off to tick the box that you can say, yes, I know what is my carbon footprint, but it should be also going forward into a direction where you can derive really insights out of it and can say, you know what, I do things now differently. I can make a different business model out of it, or I can basically use the information to run my business more valuable for my customers.
Well, thank you for sharing that additional information with us about all of this advancing technology. Now, you're in a really unique position as an adjunct lecturer on green technology for senior executives and C-level suites at the National University of Singapore. Can you tell our followers what's unique about that work in your experience?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of green technology, I would say we're the first course provider in Southeast Asia, as far as I know. So, which is pretty unique. So I lecture at the National University of Singapore's School of Computing. So that has the IT basically part in it. And interesting enough, so if you look at IT, so in general, right? So if you have the internet, for instance, as a country, it would be apparently the 6th largest polluter worldwide, which is quite interesting as a fact, right? Now, the IT sector, it's not that large as agriculture, for instance, or kind of manufacturing. But of course, it still contributes to good, almost like 4% to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And it's going to be more and more because we create more data, right? And we store it, we use the data. Everything what we are doing, actually, it's quite data intense as well. With AI algorithm, it actually will even increase. So now, the course itself is very unique. We were running it, the first cohort in December last year, and got great feedback actually from the participants. They wanted to have more on the topic, more to learn about the different technologies. So it was a kind of introduction, of course, what is green technology, what kind of technology you can use. But again, in 2 days, you can only do so much. So now the next thing is going a little bit more into depth. Now, the Prime Minister Office of Singapore, they asked me also to do a webinar in March to open that up for a broader discussion and also for broader interest from the public, because it's really, really hot topic there. And that's something where actually education is high on the agenda in Singapore, because it starts with education, shifting the mindset, and then actually fostering innovations.
Yes, well, please keep us in touch with that. As you know, we've been corresponding for several months, and one of the things that came up in our conversation was the possibility of doing some work together related to your educational platform. So, stay in touch on that one. I'm really excited about those possibilities. And where online, Claudia, can our followers learn more about the Zero Emissions Fund and Accelerator? And how can they get in touch with you about the topics that we've discussed in today's podcast program?
Sure. Yes. So you can go to www.zeroemissionsfund.vc. So there you can also submit applications for the accelerator. You can also write me directly to claudia@zeroemissionsfund.vc.
Terrific. All right. Well, we will include those links and whatever others that you send us as attachments to this program. And thanks very much again, Claudia Marcusson, Managing Director of the Zero Emissions Fund. Claudia, thank you very much for joining us again today. And to our listeners, join us again next week for another episode. I'm Paul Ellis, and this is the Sustainable Finance Podcast.